Tired of configuring the same configs on different pieces of equipment? Combing through the internet looking for answers on how to improve and do things a little bit quicker? Look no further, let's talk about network automation and specifically Ansible. So let's talk about Ansible. Why are you interested in getting Ansible? Well, if you're looking at getting into that network automation scope, then Ansible is definitely going to be one of the tools that you should become familiar with, because you can use this to automate various functions across the network, as well as push different configurations to remote clients. And we will actually be doing a quick demonstration to show you how awesome Ansible is and how quickly you can push lots of config to different devices, as well as set up a little bit of a lab to show you how Ansible actually works. So hope you enjoy, and let's hit things off. All right, before we actually get into how to set up Ansible and what it is exactly, I first want to showcase how powerful it can be. And I'm going to use a little example on an EVE-NG topology I've built. It's a couple of office sites, and we're going to configure some MikroTiks super quickly using Ansible. As long as the device has layer 3 connectivity, so IP communication can take place, and the SSH ports are open, then you can use Ansible to orchestrate and automate certain processes, which is super awesome. Now, in my little scenario, I've got these 3 offices, and I've got baseline config that I just want to quickly configure on them without having to struggle. Because if I had to log into each MikroTik and define all of the configurations manually, it would take me some time to configure everything. So I'm just logging into the MikroTik just to quickly showcase that there's nothing on here. If I do an export, sorry, there's a little Eve bug. Let's just log back in, do an export. You can see I've got an identity called RouterOS. I've got a DHCP client on Ether 1. And that's basically all the config that I've got on this device. And it's similar going to be on MikroTik 2 and 3. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Ansible to quickly just orchestrate some configuration to these devices. Now, they all connect to my management cloud on Eve, which connects to my Ansible server, which is this Ubuntu box we're on right now. And then from this Ansible server, let's just run a playbook. So I'm just going to change my directory to Ansible. And I'll explain what playbooks are in a second. I just want to show you how cool this is. Because if I run an Ansible playbook and I run my script that I want to automate to all of the devices. So this is my basic setup2.yaml. I'm going to run this. And this is so cool. Now Ansible is literally doing all of these tasks that I've set up for it. It's adding VLANs, going to add IP addresses, DHCP, firewall rules, device hardening, everything that I might find to be stock standard that I expect to be on a router when I roll it out to a customer. So here we can see all of the different tasks that I've ran. 6 different tasks. They all went okay. They went all smooth. And if I go back onto my network and I go back onto MikroTik 1, I just export this config again. Holy smokes. There's a lot more things happening here now. We've got VLANs, more DHCP options. We've got DNS servers, address lists, firewall rules, device hardening, NATs. All that stuff has been set up now from one central point. And again, this is not just on the one router. I was able to orchestrate this to many different routers. So here I'm on a second router. There's that little visual bug again for Eve. Let's just do that again. And it's that easy. So in literally how long it's taken me to talk to you guys, I've configured 3 different MikroTiks for 3 different offices, but they're all using the same LAN range currently. But there's things that you can set to change LAN ranges or whatever. But let's just say these were triple PoE customers. These are sites that would just use this type of configuration. So this is actually perfect for these sites. And if I look at my last MikroTik, let's just check export. All 3 of my devices have all of these details. And what's nice is I've set up stuff like VLANs to a switch, and you can even orchestrate stuff to switches sitting behind the routers, even to the servers or the PCs that's sitting behind the switches. This is how cool Ansible really is. But I just wanted to showcase to you IP DHCP. I'm just going to give this computer DHCP quickly, and then we're going to see if I have internet access from this virtual PC connecting to a switch to a MikroTik that I configured using Ansible. That's pretty awesome. All right, so that's just the showcase that I wanted to do quickly. Now let's actually talk about Ansible. All right, so here we are on Ansible's webpage, which is www.ansible.com. You can see it is made by Red Hat, and Ansible is supposed to be a super simple and easy network automation, let's call it a language even, for people to pick up and also just show others how it works. Because Ansible's language, which is YAML, yet another machine language, is scripted in such a way that it's very human friendly. We read it from top to bottom and we can see exactly what the script wants us to do. And you can explain it very easily to somebody that's maybe not very script orientated, so that they can also follow along with your script to see what you're doing with your. Now, Ansible has just the normal Ansible that you can install on any distribution like Linux or Ubuntu. And that's what I'm using right now. That's what you saw me just quickly automate stuff with, was just the plain old Ansible. But Ansible also has something called Ansible Tower, which is more or less orientated towards bigger companies and ISPs and whatnot, which give you this type of front panel thing that you can just log in with, and you can run all of the things from Ansible Tower. It's definitely a product. It's not something that you're just going to do for fun. It's what you're going to get if you're serious about getting big into the automation. But we're just going to use the normal Ansible to learn and also just automate some stuff, or as you saw, orchestrate some stuff. And what I recommend you do is come to the website, read up about Ansible, and a place that you're going to go to a lot is Learn. You're going to go to the Ansible docs. And then from the Ansible docs, I'm just going to go to the Ansible community documentation. And from here, it's all of the documentation. But what I recommend you do is you look at all of these. Ansible community documentation, installation, getting started, playbooks, inventory, all of these wonderful, wonderful things. I'll go over a lot of them briefly, but what I'd like to focus on right now in this video is the installation, the playbooks, and the inventory, and how we can quickly just set up a script and make things run. Because what I'm going to do is we're going to go into the installation documentation, because I highly advise you come here to see how you're going to install Ansible. So you're going to come here, you're going to go into the prerequisites, you're just going to scroll down, and then you can find out how you can upgrade your Ansible or how you can install it on a specific distribution. Now, I've installed it on Ubuntu, and if you follow this exactly, your Ansible will work perfectly. You'll just do a sudo apt update, sudo apt install software properties common, sudo add apt repository, yes, and this is very important because this PPA is basically going to allow you to download a couple of temp files and folders and structures, which is very easy to follow along with when you just start out with Ansible. And then you just do the sudo apt install Ansible. It brings it up on your Linux operating system. Let me just get out of this full screen quickly. And then once you've installed Ansible, let's just start a new terminal. If you do something like an Ansible -- version, you can then confirm what version of Ansible you're running, which is at the very top where your configuration file is. And the configuration file, it's always on the back end. It's got like basic stuff set into it that you can change if you want to. Now, if this is set to none, that means that you need to get a config file, but that is why you're using that PPA, so that it can generate a very basic config file for you that you can just populate with some information. And then it just gives you a bunch of other information like your Python version, Jinja version, library YAML, and all that stuff. All right. Now, this is just to verify that Ansible is actually installed on your machine. Now, since I've used this with Ubuntu with the PPA, I do have the folder etc Ansible. And then if I look at all of the folders and files in here, what you should have in the beginning is you should have hosts and Ansible.CFG. So the Ansible.CFG, again, is the file that will contain very specific information for your Ansible. Now, what I recommend you do is if you do load this up on Ubuntu or Ubuntu desktop like I have, get a code editor like Visual Studio Code, because it just makes it easier to read through all of this stuff and make changes quickly instead of using a text editor from your command line. So I'll use Visual Studio Code just to show you that config file. So let's just close, or let's just open that config file. I think it is actually still open here somewhere. Ansible.CFG. Now this is a basic config file, and anything that's not hashed out is basically a setting that I've set myself to tell Ansible where those details are. So here you can set where your inventory file is. Here you can set your Python interpreter. But the main thing, as long as you leave it like, even if everything is hashed out and it's just green, everything should work fine. Unless there's something big that you need to change with the default config file. For just studying and learning Ansible in the beginning, don't worry too much about it. You should just be aware of the config file exists, and it is kind of like referencing things that you can do with Ansible. Like you can see, it's going to ask for passwords. What is the sudo user going to be? If you change this to something like admin, then it's going to use admin whenever you do a sudo login to a remote device. Okay, so let's just close the Ansible config file. Now, besides an Ansible config file, you have a hosts file. Now, the host file I'm going to navigate to as well, because this is also very important. This is a file that lists the inventory of your Ansible. So these are devices that you can actually automate, that you can change stuff on. And this is also quite nice with Ansible because it's so quick to add devices. You're just going to literally make these brackets, put in a name, and then you can put the devices below that name. So if I scroll down here, you can see I've added something like MikroTiks. So that's multiple MikroTiks and what their IP addresses are. And then I've also just done like MikroTik 1, which is now just a single MikroTik, which I've given that IP, but you don't need to group it that way. There's various ways that you can set this up, and you can read through this green text just to verify the different ways of how you can set up groups. But it's very straightforward and standard to see something like an object or a group, and then what objects are under that group. So this is the host file, which is your inventory. Now, if we go back onto the command line, I just want to show you something regarding the inventory. If you do an Ansible, so we do Ansible dash inventory, and you do a -- list, this will also tell you exactly which devices or groups are currently configured that Ansible can use to reference. So inventory list, kind of important because this allows you to see what you've configured for your inventory. So now you're aware of the config file and the inventory. Let's quickly talk about Playbooks, because Playbooks plays the biggest role in Ansible. So if I just change my directory to Playbooks, you'll see I've got a couple of YAML files set up here. So YAML, this VLAN one is incorrect, but YAML. So these YAML files are actually Ansible scripts, or yet another machine language script that Ansible can use to automate or script functions in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to my text editor of choice, Visual Studio Code. And at the very beginning of the video, I showed you how quickly I set up a bunch of MikroTiks using a script, and it was this basic setup 2. So with the basic setup 2, this is what a YAML script will look like that you can use to automate to your devices. Now, I've set up some pretty basic stuff here with Ansible, but it's pretty important to note these 3 dashes at the beginning. It basically tells Ansible and whatever language this is a script. So 3, so the 3 dashes, we're starting a script. Then, very important, you're going to set your hosts, so dash space hosts, and now you can reference one of the objects in your inventory file, in your host file. We can set how we're going to connect. So with this, it's the CLI. And for my MikroTiks, just for the testing, I've set up variables, which is stuff that we can reference now outside of Ansible or in our operating system as well. So I'm telling this script what the network operating system is, and that is RouterOS. Because if I take this out, it spazzes out the script and it tells me it doesn't know what the OS is. So I'm kind of forcing it to use RouterOS. And then you can also set stuff like your Ansible_user to tell it what username it should use to log in with. Now, what's nice with Ansible is you can also set up stuff like SSH keys with your devices. So you can get that passwordless login, but I'll make a separate video on how to set up something like an SSH key. This will just get you to log in with the basic admin account. And if no password is set, and it's one of the, let's say, older RouterOS versions like 6.4 8 or something, then you don't need to set a password. You can just log in and start automating and play around like I'm doing. Now, after these variables that I've set, because this is just for us to log on to the MikroTiks really, we're setting tasks. Now the tasks you can think of as the actual scripts, the commands that we're going to be running. Now Ansible is very interesting because with the tasks, you can specify a name for the task, and then below the name, you can specify modules. Now Ansible is not just for MikroTik, it is for any device that you can think of. There are hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of network modules that you can use. And then in those modules, there's specific ways how to code and script the things. And again, that's why you'll come back to the documentation, because in this documentation, you'll find stuff like the modules that you can quickly go over and look at the different modules that exist, how to configure them, how to set them up, and how to work with other devices besides MikroTik. But I'm using MikroTik because most of you guys use MikroTik, and I use it in my day-to-day life as well. All right. So I'm just going to minimize that again. And the reason I've got this RouterOS _ command is this is the module that I'm referencing for Ansible. And then I can specify the commands I'm running. So this is literally just like me typing in commands in the command line, but now Ansible is going to do it for me. But I've set up various tasks in this file where I'm doing stuff like adding VLANs, adding IP addresses, adding DNS servers, adding IPs to LAN, adding device security. This adding IP address, let's say adding DHCP servers. Sorry, it's bugging me more than what it's supposed to, but this name is just a name. The magic really happens with the commands that you're putting in. And as you can see, I've actually done very basic scripting here. You can definitely do a lot better, but I am a novice. I'm a noob. I'm still learning. But what I've done is works. It's working for me right now, and I've created a script that just quickly configures a bunch of different details that I'd like to have on a router. But like I said in the beginning, it's nice because you can just automate this or push it out from the Ansible server to the clients instead of having to physically have the router plug in and then import the script and then run the script, and then maybe the script has issues, because Ansible can also pick up if there's issues. So when I did the initial import, I'm not sure if you guys saw, I'm just quickly going to run this playbook again. When we run this playbook, it's literally going through all of those tasks. And if it runs into any errors, Ansible will let you know. It will tell you which task failed. It might even tell you exactly what failed in the task. Maybe something wasn't referenced properly, or it could be that it was missing some type of configuration. But that's quite nice about Ansible. And if it doesn't actually change anything, then it won't say anything there. But since we're using MikroTiks and it's physically typing in these details, you're kind of always going to see that it's changing stuff. But typically, if there are no changes, it will just tell you skipped, and then it will tell you if anything was failed, and then that would be red. Cool. So what I'd like us to do before we end off the video is actually add our own little Ansible script. And I made a video about MikroTik scripting a while ago where I added 1,000 VLANs, and that was pretty cool. So let's quickly try and replicate that using Ansible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Eve quickly, and let's just add a brand new MikroTik router. So I'm adding a new router, and we'll use version 648.6. And I'll just bring this into the Eve topology, and then I'm going to connect this to my management network. I'm going to start up this MikroTik. And I'm going to show you now how we add the device to the inventory quickly, because it's so quick to do. You just need to read up a bit about it, and it will make sense, I promise. But if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. The comment section is there for a reason. All right, so we're logging into this MikroTik. The reason I'm doing that is I just quickly want to find out what IP address this MikroTik is going to receive. So I'm logging in, IP address print. Okay, so I'm getting that Eve bug again. But Eve says it's something with the MikroTiks as well, which I'm inclined to believe, because I don't see this with any of the other images that I import. Okay, so our IP is 142. Great. So all that we're going to do is we're going to go into Ansible. Actually, I'll use my text editor. So I'm going to go into my hosts file, my inventory. I'm going to add this IP address into the inventory. So 192.168.149.142. Let's create a separate object for just this router. I'm going to call this MikroTik 4, and I'll put the IP address in there. All right, so what I've gone and done is I've actually created a bit of a MikroTik template, and I'll see if I can post this on Git. Otherwise, I'll see if it will work in the YouTube comments, but it might not have the right spacing and syntaxes and stuff if we just put it in a YouTube comment. But this template we can then just use to quickly fill in some of the key details that we need to run this YAML script. And what I know what we need is we need the hosts, which we'll reference from the inventory file, which in our case was MikroTik 4. We're going to need the name of what we're going to do. So we'll call this adding MANY Vlans. And now from here with this dash, we're going to specify our commands. So I'll maybe set something like a local variable, and I might do for x from 1000 to 2000, do curly brackets, and we need to make the equal sign, interface VLAN add VLAN-ID equals $x, which is the variable that we defined, and we'll do a name equals VLAN underscore $x, but this will also just mark the string, and we'll do an interface equals ether2. So I'm going to save this script as, so I won't overwrite it, save as, let's call this MANY Vlans. Let's just replace it because that was a test I did earlier. And I'll just go back into my file and let's run an Ansible playbook, but we'll run MANY Vlans. And we're busy running the script. Let's go into our MikroTik and see what it's doing. We're just waiting to see that it's actually actioning the VLANs. And there we go. VLANs are starting to come in. And they're coming in by the hundreds. So this is nice. And it's as easy as setting that up. So I will make that script available so that you guys can add it yourselves if you want to play around with setting up some stuff in Ansible. And we'll end off the video here. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I'd like to thank the people that support the channel on Patreon and on YouTube members. You guys are helping immensely. So anyways, thanks again for watching. Catch you guys in the next video. Have a good day or evening. Bye-bye.